Yeah.
Look at these pillows.
You're right.
Alright, and go. Hey, come on, come on. Mask off, come on. Alright, and go.
So, I don't know why I should do...
And go.
Hold on, this.
And go.
Hello, Blogineers. Hello, Blogineers. Today we're checking out... What are you doing?
He's not doing anything.
Hello. I'm gonna practice. Hello.
And go. Alright, yes, and go.
Hello, Blogineers. Today we're checking...
We're gonna show you.
Okay. Hello, Blogineers. Today we're going to show you the museums of San Jose, and our first stop is...
Alright, and go.
Hello, Blogineers. Today...
Looky,
Just let him be. Come on. And go.
Hello, Blogineers. Today we're going to show you the museums of San Jose, and our first stop is the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum, which literally translates to Rose Cross. This is the largest Egyptian museum in the western United States.
Okay, how about now we're at first on this side and go.
Now we're at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. Now we're at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum, which literally translates to Rose Cross. This is the largest Egyptian museum in the western United States.
How about just now we're at without all this other side. Now we're at and
Okay,
then our next stop is.
Now we're at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. Now we're at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. Our last stop?
Our next stop and our last stop.
Our next stop is the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. Our final stop is the Rosicrucian... Our final stop is the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum.
Okay.
Yeah, but can we...
Alright, yeah.
First, we're going to look at the Afterlife Gallery.
Again, is super non-specific in what he
For
wants.
the video.
Oh yeah, I mean everything. It's amazing. I've heard him called the best preserved mummy in the Western Hemisphere. That's one of those claims that I've heard it said. I haven't double checked it, and I don't know how you measure that kind of thing. The results kind of speak for themselves. This is definitely something you expect from a very upper class person during this time period, but we don't know for sure. He actually came to us inside of a coffin that very clearly fit in the left and the middle case over there. Yeah. Poor people, very simple grave. In a cemetery, you know, not terribly different than today. Like, if you wanted to and you had the money, you can go build a pyramid, but we're probably not. Regular people, cemetery, in the ground, simple ceremony, bury it, and still kind of like leave offerings.
Alright, and go. And you can say he gave his life for tourism.
Okay. Here's the coffin of King. It's... Should I say replica?
Let's just say coffin is fine.
Wait.
Alright. Let's see people.
You can look around.
Alright, ready? One step closer. Alright, and go.
Here's the coffin of King Tut, and he gave his life for tourism.
Now there. Yeah.
Okay.
And go.
Here's the coffin of King Tut, and he gave his life for tourism. Alexander the Great of Macedon. Wait, what is this? Oh, look. There's a photograph of an entrance to an Egyptian tomb.
So to King Tut's?
No. Just a random.
Oh,
This is interesting because I guess when they have shorter coffins, instead of laying the person flat, like in a standing position, they fold up their legs.
Look, that's food for the dead.
What's this?
Use blue light. Sounds like my dog.
Yeah.
alright, you go.
Here's a hidden clue. So it's kind of hard to read, but it says to use blue light to reveal. We don't have blue light, but we have this. Oh, it's apparently they mummified animals because here's a mummified horse. Wait. Oh, it's a bullhead. It's a bullhead.
Yeah.
Apparently they also mummified animals because here's a mummified bullhead. Bullhead. They're like cow moo. Imagine if cow moo was mummified. Also, there's a cat. What is this? A gazelle.
Yep.
Okay. This is one of the most well-preserved mummies because of the way they. I forgot what they do. Do they put perfume? Right.
Yeah.
Perfume and some sort of salt, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
To,
Yeah.
to dehydrate or something.
This is one of the most preserved. This is one of the most well-preserved mummies because they used a type of salt to dehydrate the body so that the water cannot cause. So that.
Raw.
Oh yeah.
Flesh.
So that the water cannot rot the flesh. And they also put a whole bunch of perfume on it, which is why the whole body's skin is black. But the perfume also helps preserve the body. And lastly, they wrapped it in clothes. And the tour guide said that at one point, the mummy's tomb was probably robbed because actually that's too complicated.
Okay.
So King Tut was actually
Yeah.
good because passing.
Back then in Egypt, half of the kids died before they reached 5 years old. And this girl was 4.5 years old when she died from illness, and they mummified her.
And not everyone gets because
Oh, yeah.
because
Okay.
embalming
Because
is
of cost.
expensive. Yeah.
I'll say because it was expensive to do so. And not many children were mummified because it was expensive to do so. And not many kids were mummified because it was expensive to do so. So this child mummy is pretty rare.
Not to keep feeding birth. That's crazy.
One, two, three, cheese. Now we're gonna enter the tomb and go.
Is this King Tut's too?
Oh, and go.
Now we're gonna enter the tomb.
No, come on.
And go.
Now we're gonna enter the tomb.
Go.
Should put the Egyptian.
This is where they will put them up.
What if I drop?
Alright, and let me get some background here. Alright, and go.
This is a really cool experience because it feels like we went deep inside an Egyptian tomb, even though we're just in a building. And down here is kind of like how they would bury the mummies. So they would go deep into a tomb and then dig up the ground and place it in somewhere like this.
Man, the coffin must be so heavy, it's so hard to lift.
No, you can't.
Oh.
Not until we check the front. Not until we get up this way.
Yep.
We exited the tomb and now we're in the daily life gallery.
Alright, and go.
These funny jars with faces are called Bes jars. And I think Bes was an Egyptian god. So when children were sick, they were fed milk in the Bes jars in the hopes that the milk would turn into medicine. But of course that didn't happen. So oftentimes the children just remained sick.
That was pretty
These may look like funny googly eyes, but they're actually used for the mummification process. No, for mummies, right?
Yeah.
These may look like funny googly eyes, but they're actually used for mummies because the person's real eyes are dried out when they're mummified, so then they get replaced with these false eyes.
While going into the tomb, I'm going to meet you there.
Oh, Bobo, you want to press the button?
I'm going all the way up here. Over here, when you press this button, there's a person telling you how, when you press this button, a person will tell you how babies are born.
One of the most important aspects of life to the ancient Egyptians was the family. Children were reared, loved, and taught to trade. The old were cared for by their descendants, and upon death were buried reverentially, ensuring them eternal life. Through their customs and ritual practices, the Egyptians gained a sense of control over a seemingly chaotic and unpredictable world. Bes and Taret were two of the most important gods of the home, honored for their role in protecting the family. Bes, protector of the helpless, is often represented as a dancing and bearded dwarf, waving rattles or knives in order to ward off evil. The hippopotamus Taret was the guardian of expectant and new mothers, helping to see both mother and child through the difficult labor process. When a woman of Egypt gave birth, it was often in an outdoor arbor, similar to this recreation. Rather than lying down on her back, a woman would give birth squatting upright, with her feet on two bricks which acted as a birthing chair. Professional midwives assisted with the birth, although if there were complications, an obstetrician would be called to the home. The walls of the arbor were decorated with vines of medicinal value. When a tea was made of them, the mixture stopped hemorrhaging. In our model, you can see the figures of Bes along the walls at the foot of the bed, warding off evil or bad luck. All of these cosmetics and decorations were demonstrated.
Right, and go.
Some of these exhibit items have to do with an Egyptian funeral. And what happened was that the woman at the funeral, when the mummified body was carried,
was returned.
yeah. So what happens is when the mummified body was returned to the family at the funeral, then the woman would have to sob, and they would also hire other people to cry. And the woman would pour dirt on themselves. And then they said some words. And then they sent food to the mummy to help them with their spiritual journey so that they could rebirth or go into the afterlife.
Once they come back to haunt them.
Oh yeah. Or else the mummies come back to haunt them.
And go.
This display shows some. Ow, I bit my tongue. this display shows beauty products for a woman, I think. And there are two things that stand out here, which are both for their eyes. So number 13, the green powder is made of copper ore, and they would put it as eyeliner. And number 12, the black powder, is a type of lead. So it might be like toxic, but they put it on their eye. This is a statue of the god Hapi, H-A-P-I, and he was the god of the Nile, so he's associated with papyrus, which I think is like what they use for paper, and also he's associated with the river he's also associated with the river not flooding, and also women having babies.
Can you talk about this cow?
Yeah. Wait. Oh, okay. Back then, until the New Kingdom of Egypt, horses were not introduced. So during the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom, I learned about that at school. So during the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom, they used cows instead for farming. No, not for the.
Oh, not for the. Oh.
The region was
1,
important
2,
because
3,
numerous barriers,
cheese.
nomarchs or regional
Come
governments
on.
during the Middle Kingdom.
Cheese. Oh,
Approximately
this
4,000 years ago.
both of you.
The most notable
Are
of
they?
these governors
1,
was
2,
Imhotep.
3.
This reproduction of his tomb is based on photographs and measurements taken during the 1939 Rosicrucian camera expedition.
Hurry,
As
people
well
are
as a
coming.
second expedition in the 1960s.
Hurry. Right? 1, 2, 3, cheese.
These tombs
But they don't even have like.
Alright, go.
I already.
I think they scoped it for onion because that looks like an onion head. Go.
I already.
Into the tomb in a minute here. My name is Robert. We got Izzy over here is going to help us as well. Izzy, can you tell us about the entrance here?
Yeah, I'd love to. But real quick, just some info about our museum itself. So our first building was built in 1929, and that was where our original collection began. A couple years later, in 1964, a group of Rosicrucians went on a photo expedition tour of the Beni Hassan region in Egypt. From there, they were able to gather enough information for us to create a composite tomb, which we installed when we expanded our building, actually, to match our collection in 1966. As I mentioned, it's a composite tour, right? So what that's going to mean is, if you go to Egypt, you won't necessarily find this exact tomb. You would find several that look suspiciously similar, but as I mentioned, not this exact one. Robert, do you have any idea what's going on with this entrance here?
Yeah, so the biggest inspiration that we're taking for the tomb here is from a guy named Imhotep II. So if you go to Wikipedia, there's some awesome photos on there. You can see a lot of that influence. We've like verbatim copied a lot of stuff too, but it isn't all just that one dude. So the tombs in Beni Hassan are notable for being rock cut tombs. A lot of times when you think about an Egyptian tomb, you think of a freestanding structure, you know, like a pyramid. Before that, they had these things called mastabas. But you would cut a shaft into the ground where you bury the person. You fill that up, then you build something on top as almost an elaborate kind of gravestone. It's also an altar. You bring offerings for the person. But a rock cut tomb is one that you just cut into a cliffside. These tombs were very popular, especially from the Middle Kingdom onward. So, like, you know, King Tut, he had a rock cut tomb, just like, well, similar to this one. So you have an entrance cut into the hillside, and you've got the entrance, the actual doorway over here is covered in hieroglyphs. This is how the ancient Egyptians wrote down their language, and they wrote these things down on everything. But I don't know, weird question. Do you guys know which direction to read hieroglyphs?
One, please come to the front desk. Once again.
Somebody?
Did any of you recognize your name?
No.
Okay, we're not going to worry about that then. Sorry, my brain went away. You were saying something.
Is it right to left?
Right to left. Here, raise your hand if you think right to left. Yay. Okay, raise your hand if you think left or right. Okay. How about top to bottom? Yeah? Well, good news is if you raise your hand at any point, you were correct. The ancient right to left, left to right, and top to bottom. The only way you wouldn't read or write hieroglyphs, I should say, is bottom to top. So you want to horizontal versus vertical, pretty easy to figure out. Look at the lines. See how we have horizontal lines here? We read that horizontally. Here we've got vertical lines, therefore you read that vertically. The Egyptians were usually pretty helpful. We have these things that make it a little bit obvious. But right to left versus left to right can be a little bit more difficult. What you want to do is look at which direction the characters are facing. So find the animals, find the birds, find the people, find the snakes. Figure out which direction they're facing. So you notice everything here facing towards the right, which means in this particular case, we read it right to left. You read into the faces of the characters. Now, most Egyptians actually couldn't write themselves. You had a literacy rate of like 1 in 50, like 2% maybe. And to the regular like Egyptian person, that's almost like magic. If somebody's able to just make sound come out of stone. Like, do me a favor, look at that inscription and pretend you have no idea what it says, okay? All with me? Cool. How neat would it be if somebody came along, kind of looked up there and was like, oh, okay, yeah. Duwahra katet uben en efen khatiba metbat ahem hanum hutam ahtur. If somebody did that and you couldn't read Egyptian, that might seem kind of cool. Now, if you translate it into English, it actually doesn't say a lot. So this inscription says, praise Ra as he rises on the sky's eastern horizon. Behold, Kanum Hotep. So it names a few gods. It's praising Ra. It's talking about him rising like the sun. And then it mentions the person buried inside, who again is Kanum Hotep. We're going to head inside now. Follow us and make sure you watch your step. Ground's a little bit uneven. Okay. So this is the offering chamber. The offering chamber is, unsurprisingly, the chamber that you bring an offering. But Izzy, why would people want to bring an offering in here? What's the purpose of that?
So, good question, actually. I believe a few of you probably heard the word soul or spirit, you know? So, the Egyptians had a similar concept called the ka, which is essentially a person's essence, their whole being, you know? So, if you look over here, I guess this is to your right, you're gonna see, sorry guys, you're gonna see this door carved into the wall, right? I wouldn't be able to get through that door. I don't know if you can. but Khnumhotep's ka would have been able to enter the offering chamber through this door. Right here, there's a bottom little hole, little niche. That's where family members and individuals, perhaps even priests hired by Khnumhotep's family, would have been able to place their offerings for Khnumhotep, because he did need to sustain himself in the afterlife. He still needed food to be around, otherwise he would just simply disappear. But this kind of sounds like an issue to me that I just realized, do you know what happened if someone's family possibly died off, if their family line disappeared?
Yeah, so it was just giving you food, and you just starve, die, disappear, you're gone. And of course, we're mortals. I'm pretty sure we're all gonna, So the Egyptians wanted to make sure that the person's spirit would still be able to live. Hey guys, we're actually kind of full upright right now. This is where the thing's close. So, over on this wall, we have kind of a backup plan. We've got Khnumhotep who's seated in front of the great feast. On the table, we've got loaves of bread over here. We've got wine, beer, different kinds of meat. The Egyptians thought that things that you carve, things that you create artistically, they can actually become real in the afterlife. They have a definite effect. So since Khnumhotep is shown in front of a giant feast, he gets to eat that feast every single day in the afterlife, just in case nobody brings in any fresh offerings back at the altar there. So this room is something that you're going to see in every tomb, or really something similar. Every Egyptian tomb will have some way to bring in an offering. Even if it isn't a whole chamber, there is a place just out front near where the person's buried that you are able to bring offerings for their spirit. So if this is like the dining room, where you want people to come visit, say hello, the place we're about to go now is more akin to the bedroom. It's a more private area where you don't expect, random people to be tramping through. It would normally be sealed off in some ways from the rest of the tomb. To get to the next room, there is a short staircase, so follow me and watch your step. The offering chamber is the chamber that you bring offerings. What do you think you do in the burial chamber? Burial, you got it. This is where you would inter the person's body. So what we have in the center here is something called a burial shaft. And everyone always said that early tombs in Egypt, you dig a hole straight down, put the body, backfill, and build a structure, right? And we used to see that a lot. From Mastaba, the step pyramid also had a burial shaft into the ground. But in a lot of rock cut tombs, we don't see it as much. There are still definitely examples where you have burial shafts, but not always. And in Beni Hassan, we would actually, instead of having a burial shaft, you would cut like an extra room someplace to put the sarcophagus. But like we were saying at the beginning, this is kind of a combination of a lot of different tombs, a lot of different time periods to get you a better overview. Now, one other thing that we see in pretty much all tombs is very elaborate decoration. Like, all these pictures everywhere are just awesome, right? And this is something that we forget about with the ancient world sometimes, is that everything used to be painted. We used to have bright whites and reds and greens and blues and yellows, and it was super cool. And in fact, like all of the stones and stuff that we have, all of the offering stele, all of the tablets, those used to be painted too. It's just over the course of thousands of years, the paint kind of disappears. But if you look closely at a lot of our stuff, inside of some of the corners, you'll still see some paint that can be 5,000 years old, and I think that's amazing. This isn't unique to Egypt either. You guys know those Roman statues, Greek statues made out of like marble, perfectly white? Those used to be painted too. Just give it 2,000 years and paint comes off. The ancient world used to be much more colorful than we ever get credit for. Now, one more thing that has been consistent for all of human history. is grave robbing. So you'll notice that our sarcophagus here is pulled out. There's a giant hole in the corner over there. That is an incredibly common way to find a tomb, and all of this stuff has just been completely emptied out. Because the Egyptians were buried with a lot of cool stuff, and people wanted that. Gold, silver, shiny things that can be easily melted down, resold, that kind of thing. In the last couple hundred years, people have also been taking art off the walls. Egyptian artwork became very valuable as well. So when the gold and silver was already gone, people started taking plaster. And it's a shame, because remember, the Egyptians believed that all of these images would become real. They have an effect on your next life. So taking away those images is taking away a part of their afterlife. Now, the pictures here kind of tell something of a story. So over here, this is a scene of daily life. So the Egyptians thought that in the afterlife, you still have to do everything that you do now. That includes eating, sleeping, breathing, drinking, working, everything. Khnumhotep, when he was alive, was a nomarch. A nomarch is an Egyptian governor. So he was in charge of a lot of people. So he thought, you know, I was a nomarch in life, I'm probably going to be a nomarch when I'm dead. So he's seen here, overseeing all of his workers, taking care of the lands. And every single person you see is going to become real and do exactly what you see them doing. So that way, Khnumhotep is going to make sure that all of the day's work gets completed. Over here, we have some scenes of Khnumhotep enjoying himself. And by the way, this is one of the walls that is taken pretty much verbatim from the tomb of Khnumhotep II, which is super awesome. So here we have Khnumhotep hunting wild birds. Over here, he is fishing. One interesting thing to point out here is that he's not exactly using a very efficient tool for these kind of things. Like, let's say if your job was to catch birds, like this is how you made your living. You need the birds to eat and sell to other people and live. You're probably going to use something like a net to catch a lot of birds at once. It's efficient. Egyptians had nets, that works great. Khnumhotep, though, as you can see, is using a throwing stick. This is a tool that's a little bit harder to use than a net, and you're only going to get one bird at a time, if that. But Khnumhotep, again, he's not doing this to make a living. He's doing this for fun. He doesn't have to be the most efficient at it because, you know, he's having a good time. That's the most important thing. Same goes for the spear. Spear fishing was something that you can do, absolutely. It's an easy tool to make, generally. But the Egyptians also had hooks, they also had nets that worked great on fish. But Khnumhotep, it doesn't matter. He doesn't exactly have to eat the fish, he is enjoying himself on this wall. Over here, Khnumhotep again, like I said, he could be everywhere. But this time he's taking a test. The Egyptians thought you have to prove yourself worthy of existing for the rest of eternity. And there were a series of trials you had to complete in order to move on. This is one of the last tests that you take. It's called the 42 Negative Confessions. So you're going to be introduced, well, you're going to introduce yourself, excuse me, to 42 different deities. You're going to walk up to each one, introduce yourself, and then say, I've never done such and such bad things. This is a two-part test. First, you're supposed to know the names of your gods. This is one of those memorization things. You should know the names of your gods because you're living with them for the rest of eternity. It's kind of a polite thing to do. The second part is kind of like a cover letter. You're trying to put your best foot forward. You're telling the gods, I'm a good person because I don't do bad things. So you might walk up to Sekhmet. You go, Hail Sekhmet, I have never been an eavesdropper. Or Hail Sobek, I have never stirred up strife. Things of that nature. All of these confessions, by the way, they're kind of individual. There are some overlap between a lot of these things, but in general, you're saying things about yourself. They're tailored to you. So the negative confessions of a scribe are going to be a little bit different than one of, say, like a soldier or something. One common theme we see, though, is about honesty. You're always supposed to be honest. You're always supposed to be trying your best, and that's one of the biggest things that we're looking for. Over here is the final test. This is the weighing of the heart ceremony. Khnumhotep is brought forward to the scales of Ma'at. On one side of the scale, you have a vase. This is going to contain the person's heart. Over here is Ma'at's feather of truth. Ma'at means order, balance, justice. It's the proper way of doing things. So if you lived your life the way you're supposed to, you were in perfect balance with Ma'at. That's what they're looking for. But every single bad thing you ever did, every single thing that was incorrect, according to Ma'at, causes guilt. Guilt wasn't something that you, personally felt. It was an objective fact. You did something bad, therefore you were guilty, and that causes your heart to become heavy. The weight of your deeds imparts a kind of physical weight. If your heart is really heavy, you weren't a good person. They're going to take your heart and feed it to this creature over here. Her name is Amut, and if she eats your heart, you stop existing. And that's it. Now the Egyptians, though, they did love their backup plans, and we've got a backup plan up over here. This is Nut. Now she was a god of the sky. Every day, Nut changed day into night, and night back into day. She was a god of cycles, and the Egyptians believed that everything was on a cycle, including life and death. If Nut can change the sun and the moon, maybe she can help your soul move on in its cycle and end up where it belongs. And we see that happening right over here. Hammurabi has passed his test. He's being led forward to be introduced to Osiris, where he gets all the nice things written on his walls. Now, one thing I want to point out, though, is that a lot of the stuff that we have here, it comes from tombs specifically. Offerings, mummies, obviously. But a lot of the material culture from Egypt that we get to see right now, it comes from tombs. And sometimes this gives us the idea that the ancient Egyptians, they were just obsessed with death. I mean, look at all the stuff about death and dying the Egyptians made. But that's not exactly it. They didn't think about, death terribly much more than we do today. They were really concerned about their lives. They wanted their lives to continue on. And that was really important to them. One other important thing to mention is survivorship bias. Stuff in tombs preserves better than stuff that's just left out. If you have a pot and you put it underground and seal it off in the rest of the world, it has a much better chance of lasting for 5,000 years than a pot that was just used every day in somebody's house. Because of that, we have more things preserved in tombs than from everyday life. So it's always really cool when we see just regular bits of items that normal people would use and just threw away one day. And that gives you a great idea of who the people really were. And in the next gallery up over here, we have our daily life gallery. You can see stuff just like that. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to take those outside where we're not confined in this tiny little space. But thanks everybody for following along with me today.
Thank you.
You have a kind of duty to maintain your entire family. It wasn't.
I didn't realize it's 5.
This is how they pronounce cat.
Oh, let's try that one more time. I can't. Hang up.
The way they pronounce.
Oh, so this real quick. Alright.
What are you doing? You told me to go in the. This is how the Egyptians pronounce dog. Ew, ew. And this is how they pronounce cat.
They're very rare.
Hey, this one's corn.
Does that look like a corn mummy?
Yeah.
Oh, and corn mummy is placed in the wooden coffin.
And go.
This is the map of ancient Egypt, and of course all of the cities and towns are located along the Nile River because or else they don't have water.
Meow.
Things that you can still see.
5,000.
About these.
No, I never.
Yeah, he didn't yet. Alright, go.
These boats are crazy because the rim on the outside to block them from tipping out of the boat is so short.
That looks like a cap.
Oh, it's a
See the
warrior
other
goddess.
side. We can see the other side.
Go to the other side. You can see.
This statue with no arms is Neith, which was the warrior goddess, and she doesn't have arms. Oh, Isis. Where's Isis? Isis is
Number 5.
no number 2. Isis is
Number 5. Here.
oh here Isis is here. Isis is which god?
Okay, alright.
One thing I noticed is that the Egyptian gods are animals. For example, this god Thoth is a baboon. It looks very funny. And Anubis is a dog.
What?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Here,
I see
here,
it too.
hold camera.
Okay.
Be gentle,
I know,
Georgie.
I got it.
Don't bump him against this.
Yeah.
Coming down.
Did you see?
You only find my waist to
Alright, up. Over here.
I don't know. What is this? What am I looking?
Over here is a person. I think it's a fairy. Is it?
You have to change your voice. No, Marvin. Whoa, it's like 3D.
It's kind of like how the
Yeah, come look at this.
They actually built the set in there?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wow. Wow.
Come to this one. Let me film the clicking that. This is bigger.
Scribes inventory their library. All books had to be hand copied. Oh. Oh.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay, let's oh.
Books were not printed until the Gutenberg printing press, but this ancient Egypt was 5,000 years ago. So in this model, the scribes are writing the books by hand. That must have taken a lot of work.
the person dies, then they start prepping for everything. 70 days.
Cleopatra was born.
What's alchemy?
Almost like magic, chemistry, magic, too many things. And go.
Lastly is the alchemy exhibit. This is what an alchemist workshop would look like. So there's glass, feather, oh wait, so there's glass, peacock feather, bunch of plants, and other random stuff on the table.
And go.
And
that's it.
okay, yeah. And that's it for,
Oh, 2, 3, and go.
and that's the Rosicrucian.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. And that's the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. Brother, what was your favorite part?
My favorite part was maybe the tomb.
Yeah, I also really liked the tomb where it was like you went underground. And I also really enjoyed the rest of the exhibits because there were many cool artifacts and information that we learned about ancient Egypt.
Stand up. And what else?
Okay.
And the tour. Enjoy the tour too.
Yeah.
When we come to the front, so your face is not straight.
It was also nice that
Let him sit down.
it was also nice that there were tours of it. It was also nice that there were guided tours available for the Egyptian tomb. Almost signature cough. No, it's
In
fine.
the front.
It's fine.
Oh, one more time. Okay. It says face is straight. And go.
It's also nice that there were guided tours for the Egyptian tomb. Wait, hold on, I'll say that again.
Okay.
It's also nice that there were guided tours for the Egyptian tomb. And then
Stay tuned for as we.
Stay tuned for the next video where we visit the downtown museums of San Jose.
Bye bye.
And do one in case of combine everything. And now let's head to the next section. We'll come to your face in cover in the shape. Go.
And now let's head to our next stop. Noli should wash his hands.
Okay.
I know.
All right.
You can climb up. It's so
Oh,
bad.
there's a whole outdoor portion of the museum.
Don't fall.
I've climbed up before. This thing you can go as high as you want.
Okay.
I think there's a labyrinth in there too. All right, and go.
Outside the museum, there's also a peace garden.
Wait, there's a labyrinth? Wait, there's a labyrinth?
Mm-hmm.
Wait.
Oh, peace garden means no filming, Noli.
Yeah.
Oh, is it in there? Is a garden? Is a labyrinth in there?
I don't know. Oh yeah. Is there? Born in Arizona.
All right. All right. Ready to hear it? 1, 2, 3, cheese.